Welcome, everybody. This is Matt Hardy. I'm the Program Director for Planning and Policy here at AASHTO. Welcome to webinar number 2 of our Transportation Asset Management webinar series sponsored by FHWA and AASHTO. The topic of this one is on asset management and performance management. I want to talk about some logistics first off. The first thing is that if you can, to please mute your phone. I've created what we call a lecture mode, so everybody by default is muted. And just to remind the actual speakers or the presenters that they can hit *6 to unmute their phones. One other bit of housekeeping is that these webinars are being recorded, and you can view the recordings a couple days afterwards, depending on how long it takes us to actually get these things converted and posted up at tam.transportation.org. That is the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management website. So I think that's all for housekeeping. Now I want to turn it over to Steve Gay with FHWA's Office of Asset Management. Steve?
I say good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Federal Highway, in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, are continuing our asset management webinar series. We think it's a great opportunity to learn from what other states and practitioners are doing in the area of asset management. This is part of a 12-part webinar series. This is number 2 in the series. Please register. The information on that is on the AASHTO Asset Management website, or you can link to it from the Federal Highway Asset Management site. Webinars will be held every 2 months. We start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. Works well for everybody, even far western Hawaii and Alaska. And we previously had the subject of asset management and safety, risk-based asset management. Other topics will include organization issues in asset management, GIS, etc. If you have any recommended topics for webinars, please put it in the Q&A area or send an email to Matt Hardy or myself. And please use the Q&A feature to submit questions. And the next webinar will be held on March 13th at 2 o'clock. Let me pass it back to Yana and Matt.
So, Yana, are you there? Not hearing Yana. I'm going
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was on mute again. Sorry about this. Okay. So I was talking already, and it's always a funny thing when you hear someone saying, "I'm not hearing you." Anyway, so why is asset management and performance management so important and the topic together? As Steve just mentioned, this is, I think, by far one of the most popular topics in the set of webinars that have been held so far by the Subcommittee on Asset Management and the Federal Highway Office on Asset Management. Asset management applies performance principles to the long-term cost-effective maintenance, preservation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction of physical assets. This view of asset management and performance management relationship is one that has been developed by the Federal Highway Expert Task Group, and is one that can evolve as the practice progresses. We know that the 2 topics are working together. How they work together, as all of you know, to some degree depends on your individual situation. We know that asset management that lead to the preservation and enhancement of infrastructure conditions also contributes to other performance objectives that a transportation agency has, such as safety, mobility, economic development, and environmental sustainability. Asset management and performance management have to work together to get the results you're seeking in your agency. In many transportation agencies, the asset management program is one of the most developed applications of performance management as an agency has implemented performance management, because bridge management, pavement management are one of the more mature areas where performance objectives have been defined, management systems are in place that allow them to make decisions, to budget based on performance objectives, and to monitor those activities over time and feed that information back for better future decision making. Many transportation agencies are already using asset management principles as part of their performance management program, and the provisions within the MAP 21 are sure to increase that interest. And we're going to hear more about that today from our set of speakers. So the purpose of the webinar is we've heard broadly about why this webinar series is important. As Steve has mentioned, it's about sharing lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. We're going to hear from 3 states who have been working in asset management and performance management, and they're going to share their best practices and their lessons learned. They're going to talk about integration of asset management and performance management programs. And we're also going to hear from Federal Highway and AASHTO on work related to asset management and MAP 21. So the agenda today, we're going to first hear from Steve Gay and Matt Hardy. Butch Watson is not able to join us today, so Steve from Federal Highways will be covering that portion. And they're going to be talking about Federal Highway and AASHTO perspectives on MAP 21 implementation. We will then have Washington State talk on linking asset management and performance management, protecting assets, reducing risk, and making a case for funding. And we'll have Daniela Bremer, Sean Milton, and Pat Morin be our presenters for that. And then we'll have Jennifer Brandenburg from North Carolina DOT talk about their journey with asset management and performance management. And our final speakers will be Ron Sivert and Craig Newell from the Michigan DOT, and they're going to be talking about asset management tools and methods for monitoring performance. And just a reminder, we will have a Q&A at the end, and it will depends on the amount of time we have remaining. We'll take all questions and have the speakers answer it and post it no matter what. But if you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A feature of the live meeting website, which is at the top menu bar, and we'll be collecting that, and Matt at the end of the webinar will go through them in the sequence that they've been posted. Okay, so let's get started. So Steve Gay and Steve Gay, who is the head of FHWA's Asset Management and Pavement Management team, and Matt Hardy, who's the Program Director for Planning and Policy at AASHTO, are going to talk about asset management and MAP 21. Steve will start.
Yeah, thank you, and I apologize for Butch got called to a meeting just a short bit ago. So the Federal Highway Performance Management effort is being led by Pete Stefanos, who's the Office Director. You may know Francine Shaw-Whitson, the team leader, and Max Swellen and others who are very involved with the performance management. We've held quite a few outreach sessions, and I thank everybody for participating. The information has been very valuable as we move ahead. And we're in the rulemaking process. With that, I'm going to focus on the asset management rulemaking in MAP 21. We've held some outreach sessions. I want to thank Matt Hardy from AASHTO for coordinating them. We've also met with the private sector and received some very valuable feedback, input based on what was in MAP 21. And notice of proposed rulemaking is anticipated to be issued in the Federal Register this spring. I think the key issue of looking at performance management is just looking at the very issue of performance measures. it's a key part of asset management. You know, as you know, in MAP 21, says to focus on pavements and bridges. You know, is it element level or what? Well, we're moving ahead in bridges. For pavements, you're at IRI. Maybe it's more than that. I think a key when you look at any measure is looking at the performance today, but also looking for the condition, performance, and the resource needs in the longer term. I think that's a key part when you look at asset management is looking out in the longer term. You know, as the state is looking at developing their STIP, etc. And of course, MAP 21 focuses on pavements and bridges, but as states are looking at developing their asset management plans, what about for other physical assets, be it signs, signals, retaining structures, facilities? Are there performance targets, measures with those that are meaningful to a DOT? And how meaningful are they when those trade-off and decision-making come down to where to put the money? What's important? And how about differences between highway classes? I know as we've talked about the pavement measure is, and I know some states do this, interstate is held at a higher standard than roads carrying lesser amount of traffic. And I know when you talk about management systems, in the asset management rulemaking, we're also addressing pavement and bridge management systems, and of course talking about deterioration curves and looking to investment strategies. When you look at some of the other physical assets, are we also talking about deterioration curves? And Matt's going to raise some issues what AASHTO's been involved in, and I think they're important as we all move ahead and address this issue of performance in asset management. But a key thing that, you know, continuously comes up is looking at the short and the long-term performance as it ties to what our customers are looking for, as also resource decisions. Let me turn it over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm going to talk, Steve talked about some of the asset management provisions in MAP 21 and where FHWA is going. I want to focus in on some of the performance management, performance measurement requirements and efforts of MAP 21. The AASHTO, and probably there are a lot of people that are interested in this, AASHTO has a standing committee on performance management. And that standing committee is really charged as the collecting bin, sort of central gathering place of all the different sort of performance measurement, performance management aspects of you know, AASHTO. It doesn't mean that they're going to get down into the weeds or anything of specific performance measures for bridges or for pavements, but they're sort of the clearinghouse, and the Standing Committee on Performance Management reaches out to those different other standing committees and subcommittees to better understand and to better articulate what the performance measures should be. Last year, the Standing Committee on Performance Management under Kevin Keith established a special task force, which is chaired by Paul Deggs, whose initial purpose was to develop or recommend a limited number of national level measures that would meet the requirements of MAP 21. And we did the task force did this. Those national measures or the findings of those national measures were reported to the AASHTO Board of Directors, presented to them at the AASHTO annual meeting in Pittsburgh last November, and you can actually download that report at SCOPM, SCOPM.transportation.org. So I'm going to the next few slides to talk about that. But the purpose of the task force wasn't just to sort of develop those measures, though that was a sort of a critical aspect of it. It was also sort of established to help prepare AASHTO members to basically meet the new federal performance management requirements. This task force was established before MAP 21 came out, basically in preparation with the understanding that there would likely be national level performance measurement requirements within MAP 21. So we wanted to make sure that the state and that AASHTO was prepared organizationally to help address this. And then two other aspects of this task force was it's one thing to actually develop the actual performance measures, but you also have to develop strategies for communicating the reporting of these national level measures. So how do you do that with different audiences, from elected officials to engineers and planners to the general public? So that's another aspect that the task force is getting into right now. And then finally, help educate the general public on the need for transportation investment in our nation. So hopefully some good information, some good research and reports that can be used to do that. So on to the actual national measures that the task force developed. When these measures were being developed, again, SCOPM reached out to a number of other standing committees, like the Subcommittee on Bridges, Environment, Planning, et cetera, Freight. All those different committees actually come up with the recommended national measures, and SCOPM sort of acted as this clearinghouse. But there were 6 overarching principles that guided the development of these measures, and I want to touch on these first, because I think this is really important, that when you actually start thinking about these measures, you have to consider these overarching principles as well in understanding why were these the measures identified? Why were those the conclusion or the findings of the task force? So the first one is that there's a difference. There's a difference between national level measures that are required within MAP 21 and performance measures that state DOTs and even MPOs and other local transportation agencies are going to use on a day-to-day basis, or are using on a day-to-day basis, for the planning and programming of their transportation projects, and how funding gets spent. The national level measures are a few. What a state DOT might use to actually budget out funding for bridges or for rehabbing pavement, all those different things. You're going to use a lot more measures than just IRI, for example, for a pavement. You're going to use some sort of a structural health measure that includes rutting and cracking and all those great things. So there's a difference between national level measures that's required and the ones that a state DOT is going to be using on a day-to-day basis. The second one is specificity and simplicity. Any type of national level measure needs to follow both the SMART and the KISS principles, SMART being specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, and then KISS, keep it short and simple. The more complicated the measure, the more different variables that you use in the measure, the more complicated it gets. It's harder to understand how that measure, how the different inputs are affecting the measure. So simpler is better. The third one, possession, is 9/10 of the law. National level measures should focus on areas and assets that state DOTs have control over. There's a lot of talk about land use measures and transit-based measures. State DOTs don't have control over land use. So if you have a land use-based measure where that's a critical input, you can't hold the state DOTs accountable for that, as an example. Fourth one, reduce and reuse. What we're dealing with in terms of national level performance measures, what's in MAP 21, this is a starting point. This is new, not the idea of performance measures, but the idea of national level measures that have to be reported on by all the different state DOTs. So this initial set that we're using needs to build upon this sort of existing experience of performance measures, management practices, data sets, and reporting processes that are already in place. We shouldn't be creating something new when something that's already being done could sort of be adapted or reused for purposes of the national level reporting. Fifth one is this idea of ever forward. National measures should be forward-thinking to allow continued improvement over time. We want to think about what data we're using to calculate these measures. How old is that data? If it's 5 to 7 years old, how useful is that for making decisions in the future if the economy has changed, if the environment has changed, if a number of sort of exogenous external factors have sort of changed the way we're thinking. And then the sixth one, probably one of the more important ones, is communicate, communicate, communicate. That messaging, the impact and the meaning of these national measures is very, very important, and that we don't have just one audience, but we have multiple audiences, from elected officials at the state level, the local level, the federal level. We have engineers, we have planners, we have practitioners, and we have the general public that we have to communicate with. And we need to understand and know how to communicate with all those different audiences because it's very important. So I'm going to briefly go through the different measures that the SCOPM task force came up with. I don't want to spend too much time on any detail. You can read these yourself. You can download the actual findings report and look at them in more detail, because each of these measures, there's a lot of information that goes along with it that we cannot include on the slides here. So I would encourage you to go to that national report, which is available again at scopm.transportation.org. Download that and read through it, because it'll provide you a lot more detailed information. So the first category, we had, I think, 6 different sort of performance measurement areas. The first one being safety, and there are 4 measures that were recommended for safety. The first one being number of fatalities, and then fatality rate, and the number of serious injuries, and the serious injury rate. So all of this information is already being collected, so it's not really new for the state DOTs. And then the other thing is that it would be done as a 5-year moving average. So the important aspects for safety. Let's go to the next slide. Pavement condition. So what the task force recommended as an initial measure is IRI, International Roughness Index, for both interstate and non-interstate pavements. But the group leading this effort knows that IRI is a measure of ride quality and not necessarily the structural health of the overall pavement. And what they'd rather see is a pavement structural health index, one that we would want to move to. So the percentage of pavement which meet minimum criteria for pavement faulting, rutting, and cracking. We're not there yet. We don't have all of the data or the technology to collect all of this in a comprehensive way. So what's initially being recommended is IRI, with moving towards a pavement structural health index. This is a good example of communication, where if you try to communicate with the general public, they might like the idea of an IRI, whereas the engineers and the pavement design people, they don't really want IRI, they want that structural health index. The next category, bridge measures, and some of these are somewhat mandated within MAP 21. The first one being percent of deck area on structurally deficient bridges, and then moving towards a measure of NHS bridges in good, fair, and poor condition based on deck area. The next slide. Freight. So the freight system performance and the CMAX measures on traffic congestion are all similar in terms of their measures. So for freight, there were 2, annual hours of truck delay and then a truck reliability index. And this data would be derived from a national level, nationally available data set that FHWA would be collecting and providing to the state DOTs to sort of use and calculate these measures. So the freight one, again, it's hours of delay and then a reliability index for trucks. And then for system performance, where we're not excluding trucks, it would be annual hours of delay of all the traffic, and then also a reliability index based upon the 80th percentile of travel time. Don't have enough time to go into it today, but again, in that national level performance measure report, it goes into a lot more detail about why did we choose those 2 measures, why is it the 80th versus the 95th. If you go to the next slide. On CMAQ, so CMAQ, the congestion mitigation air quality, there are 2 associated with that the MAP 21 calls out. The first one being on-road mobile source emissions, and the second one being traffic congestion. So for the on-road mobile source emissions, they're recommending a performance measure based upon the criteria pollutant emissions, the VOC, NOx, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, et cetera. And then the second one, again, in similar fashion to the freight and to the system performance, annual hours of delay. Now, for CMAQ, these measures would only be calculated for those projects that are being used that are being funded through CMAQ money, and it's only applicable to MPOs that serve transportation management areas with populations over 1 million and that are in non-attainment or maintenance areas. So that's some more detail about CMAQ. CMAQ is a little bit unique, a little bit different from the other ones, which are more system level, whereas CMAQ is more based upon the money that's going to fund very specific projects. To the next slide. So next steps, this is where I end. So the next steps for SCOPM is that the task force is still in existence. They're still meeting, and what they're going to be focused on in the winter 2012, winter 2013 is this idea of target setting, reporting, and communication. There'll be another workshop with the task force members, probably in March or April, looking at what are best practices for states to set targets. On different for these different performance measures. How do you report that for the requirements of MAP 21, and then the sort of larger effort of how do you communicate this? It's not just about developing some sort of a report that goes to FHWA. While that's required within MAP 21, I think there's an opportunity to do a better sort of communication exercise, again, with those three different aspects, the elected leaders, the engineers, the planners, the practitioners, as well as the general public. And then finally, SCOPM is going to be the clearinghouse, this task force of coordinating AASHTO's collective response to the different rulemakings that are going to come out, the NPRMs. And from my understanding from FHWA is that they're going to be having staggered rulemakings or NPRMs coming out focused initially on safety national measures first. 2 months later, they're going to come out with the asset-based measures for bridges and for pavements, and then 2 months after that will be the final set of measures related to system performance, freight, and the CMAQ measures. So instead of one NPRM coming out in the spring, they'll be staggered over 3 different NPRMs based upon the overall level of maturity of those measures. So I will end it there and turn it back over to either Jana to introduce.
Yes, I'm going to take over and just introduce our next speaker. So our first state presentation will be from Washington State, and we have Daniela Bremer, who's the Director of the Strategic Assessment Office, Pat Morin, who's the Operations Manager from the Capital Program Development and Management Office, and John Milton, who's the Director of the Risk Management Office. And they're going to be talking about Washington's linking asset management and performance management.
Okay, good morning. This is Daniela. Welcome. Greetings from Washington State. We have 3 folks in the room here, and we're going to do a little tag team. So I'll be speaking first to a couple overview slides, and then followed by John and Pat in some more detail on some of the elements. So thanks for inviting us to participate in this webinar. We are glad to be able to share some of our experiences, and I think combined of what we have all done nationally, we think we have a good, solid foundation to respond to the MAP 21 asset management provision. So I'm really hopeful in this regard. The first slide is just a quick overview of WSDOT's responsibilities and scope of WSDOT's agency management responsibilities. And so we have highways, ferries, aviation, passenger rail, freight rail, and we have some transit support, also not as much as some other states do have in that area. So our asset management responsibility are quite large. We have a huge ferry fleet. It's the biggest one in the country. It's the third biggest thing in the world. So that in itself is a huge set of responsibilities for asset preservation as well as the highway system and the related assets to that. Next slide. Are we moving the slides? No, right? Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is then our experience in linking asset management, performance management, and also risk management. Performance management is an integral part of asset management. It's not a separate element, and by itself it doesn't stand alone. Performance management supports the decision-making process, the investment processes, and the policy process in our agency, and has done for many years. We had some challenges in accountability, and we developed what we call a brand of our performance approach, performance journalism, performance reporting, and the most evident menu for that is the Grey Notebook that most of you are familiar with, which has gone quite a transition in the last 11 years, constantly trying to address changing requirements, changing environments as far as policy, revenue scenarios, and trying to be adaptive. So one of the key elements of our performance management process is being adaptive to what's happening in our immediate policy environment, our stakeholder environment, and our asset environment. And we've been able to be responsive to questions on performance because of our approach to that. So I think it's been somewhat successful for us. By no means have we figured it out, and it's a journey that I always stress to folks who ask questions. It's a journey. We're constantly reinventing ourselves and trying to do better and finding new ways to report information. But basically, the basic philosophy is what most folks understand in performance management: what gets measured gets managed. And we also have this added sort of philosophy of no surprises reporting, and I'll speak to that in a second. Next slide. Our goal is to share the performance of WashStat's most complex, diverse programs in a way that people can understand it, that you can easily tell to your neighbor. We have this thing we call the barbecue test. Can you explain our performance results to somebody over a barbecue in your neighborhood? If you say yes, and if it works, then I think we met the criteria for easy communication. Matt just talked about the MAP 21 provisions and what AASHTO's doing. And communication is one key element in getting to information to our stakeholders. The performance management itself is not very meaningful if you don't get the information to the right audiences, and that's the most critical part. How do we inform our audience about the needs of our assets, conditions of our assets, and investment needs, and how do we make a compelling argument? It's been something we've been thinking about every day and constantly trying to figure out how to make it better. Again, candid transparency. We report on everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, using this movie theme here. We don't hold anything back. And we're very, very frank about what's working and what's not working. The plain talk, understanding, and bringing to folks that they can really understand the data that's complex. The stories are complex, yet we have to make it simple for them. We combine our performance reporting in terms of data, this narrative, quite a bit of narrative reporting in order to explain to folks in the performance journalism approach what's happening with telling the story. The storytelling is, in the end, really what people will remember and what they understand, and make it accessible. We have a huge, web presence with our performance data. We have hard copy. We have different venues by which we reach our audience and our stakeholders, and the timeliness is very important. Currently, we have a quarterly report. Some of our data is available on a monthly basis. Again, the performance journalism being compelling, telling the story. These elements that I describe in this slide are pretty straightforward for most performance management systems. The communication, demonstrating how the program contributes to priorities, understanding the priorities in our strategic planning process. Those priorities are our legislative members in our governor's office. Being able to explain and evaluate the before and after studies are very important for us on all elements of our improvements that we're making. What did we have? What's the situation before we improved something? What happened after? And were we effective in how we use taxpayer dollars? That's one of the most important elements of the performance reporting process. The allocation of resources based on performance data is a key element that Pat and John will also talk to. And again, how to deal with targets and looking at meeting some of those objectives. We have a very active legislative membership, and we have a very active governor's office, and we have a lot of processes and venues for sharing information directly with those groups of stakeholders on an ongoing basis, having an open dialogue at all times, which is really important in terms of being effective and having a two-way conversation. Performance reporting can work. We found it very beneficial for WashStat. We have some very specific results that we contribute to performance management accountability. Some of these revenue increases we received in the past were directly related to our enhanced accountability and being able to tell the story of both what we have done with the taxpayers' money, but also of the asset needs that are out there, which is really important. And then you can see some of the initiatives that the majority of Washington State citizens voted for or against, depending on the referendum. It was also a testimony that we have reached the right audience with our information. So in some ways, some communication we have done was effective. Also, again, I want to stress it's constantly changing. We constantly have to reinvent ourselves in that regard. How does asset management and risk management benefit performance reporting? Again, it's sort of a circular situation. Again, it's not one of these elements stands alone on its own. Asset management, performance management, risk management are important elements in the overall management of a program. So the benefits, obviously, are the informed media. The media often, we just had an email yesterday, again, some of the local newspapers picked up something out of the gray notebook and makes it a performance report when they don't have a exciting news day. We're really happy about the fact that they find some of our information. They can plug it in when they have a slow day, and we create a relationship with our media and our various tools that we provide them so they can make some quick decisions that, oh, this might be interesting to put in our article today. Let's talk about this. And asset reporting is often the center of that. Again, the benefit of having an engaged legislative membership and governor's office, I cannot stress enough how important this is. So we provide probably much more detailed information than we would have traditionally done maybe even 10 years ago, because the more they know, the more we can have a partnership in discussing what we need to do in order to improve our assets. And of course, then the other benefit of performance management is the management of the system itself, having better tools, better practices, having informed managers and employees, which is the internal part of performance reporting. The other benefit in terms of asset allocation of resources, again, we in a revenue-constrained environment, as most DOTs and other agencies are, we have to squeeze out every ounce of productivity of the systems we already have, and there's no way around it. We have to use performance data in that regard. And we have to reduce liability and risk, and I think that is one key element of performance management and how we use our data. And with that, I want to turn it over to John to talk about some of the connections.
And some of our other presenters have suggested that there's a critical linkage between risk management, performance management, and asset management. In the state of Washington, we are very tuned together in what we do, and in fact, that's why all three of us are here doing the presentation. From our perspective, you need to know what your strategic objectives are so that you can set your performance criteria appropriately. And in that sense, to be able to have the assets in place to be able to carry out what you wish in performance. So if we take this in terms of, say, mobility, for instance, we may want to provide a mobility level of service A, but the question becomes, do we have the assets in place to be able to maintain that level of service A? And if not, then the issue of risk management becomes a very, very important issue, because there's going to be a series of trade-offs that need to be made to account for whatever performance level is set and whether or not you have the assets in place, the state of those assets and being able to carry out their intended function, and whether or not you need new assets to be built. And Pat's going to talk a little bit about the program, but before we get there, one of the critical things for us that we do in determining what is the appropriate level of risk is once we say that we need to make some change, we look throughout our entire product development process to see if the standards and criteria and the way that we are carrying out our intended functions need to be adjusted to be able to meet our intended performance or whether or not we have the assets in place. So Pat's going to go through an example of what we've done, for instance, in one of our preservation areas.
Hey, thanks, John. So what I'd like to give you a real brief overview of is some specific examples that our office, which administers the Capital Highway Construction Program, has experienced since 2005 and how we've worked with both Daniela's office and with John in order to be able to make some significant changes in how we do business in order to meet those department's goals and objectives. So here in front of you on the screen is a situation where the department found itself in 2005. As Daniela pointed out, the department had just received from the legislature a significant revenue package, the second. We had received an earlier one in 2003. Following that, there was a dramatic increase in the construction cost index that added an additional 30% to the cost of those projects that had been line itemed by our legislature and that they were focused on delivering. As a result of that emphasis by them to deliver those projects, we had to look across our other capital programs and began making some reductions in our 6 to 10 year investment plans in order to be able to free up capital to pay for those cost increases due to inflation. And so here is an example of our pavement preservation program. We were averaging slightly above $200 million per year on pavement preservation, and we began, as you can see by the drawing, to take it down. We have 20,000 lane miles, and over the last 10 years, or about since 2005, we have reduced our paving expenditures by 27%. We then sat with Daniela and said, how do we begin to tell this story to the public and to the legislature? So we began running an annual story in the Great Notebook every year on pavement. The pavement story that we're telling is not just about the fact that we're reducing money. It also talks to them about how and what is lowest life cycle cost. And what, then, is our goal in the legislature, in the DOT, to do this reduction that we are showing on the drawing, and what are the risks associated with it? Next slide. So you can see here, then, that we began to explore several alternatives, among them Dalbar retrofit selective panel replacement on our rigid concrete, as well as converting our asphalt roadways on the lower volume ones from ACP to chip seal. Again, we sat down and we began to inform our audience about what is a chip seal, what is asphalt, what are the performance measurements we're using, and how does this change in our policy affect their ride. As you can see by the chart on the lower portion of the graphic, we have been very successful. The light shaded line is our revenue, and you can see that we've been slowly decreasing the amount of revenue while at the same time maintaining the performance goals that we have had established since the early 1980s. Next slide. These are just some examples of the types of information we are providing to our readers in the Great Notebook. We are actually presenting for them what are the performance measurements that we are using for both flexible pavement and rigid pavements. Next slide. These are a list of all of the changes that we've made since 1990 through 2010 in order to achieve that 27% reduction. Again, we're not afraid to talk to our readers about all of these changes as we begin to consider them and implement them. We rely on our pavement management office here within the agency to help us write those stories to make sure that they are technically correct. Next slide, please. I've given you the paving example. However, we are not limited in terms of telling our story to just pavements. We also have, as Danielle pointed out, a very significant ferry fleet. In 1999, there was a significant initiative that was passed by the voters that eliminated a significant motor vehicle excise tax revenue source, and it has been a challenge for the agency to not only preserve the highway infrastructure but also the ferry infrastructure, as they were one of the prime recipients of that revenue source. And so they began implementing a program of asset management for their ferry terminals as well as for their ferry vessels. Again, they have been working very closely with Daniela's staff and the Great Notebook on an annual basis to begin telling their story about what they own, how they measure their performance, and their successes. Next slide. In this particular situation, we thought it was relevant to include a brief discussion of how we tell our story about our bridges, because Washington sits in one of the highest ground motion seismic zones on the west coast next to Alaska and California, and we have a significant percentage of our structures that are vulnerable because they were built prior to the latest seismic standards. So while we are trying to ensure that our structural condition is adequate and that we do not impact the freight community from weight restrictions, we also have to find ways to free up enough capital to begin retrofitting those bridges. This is important to those of us in Washington because 30% of the economy of the state of Washington comes through our major seaports from commerce that comes from the Pacific Rim. So here we are, we're trying to figure out how to free up capital for seismic retrofit, which is demanding a large amount of funding, while at the same time getting our bridges to lowest life cycle cost. So we began telling our story again to the public on an annual basis through the Great Notebook, in which we describe to them how we inspect our bridges, what bridges elements are included, what our performance is. We've also talked to them about what we call our lifeline seismic routes. We began looking at corridors that were essential and ensuring that we were spending only the funds that we really needed to ensure that that route was secure. Next slide. These are just, again, some of the information we share with the public through the Great Notebook. Here is the elements of our bridges that we evaluate, our threshold for performance, and we have fairly detailed discussions. Again, the technical writing is done by our bridge office in coordination with our performance reporting office and our office in capital programming. Next slide. We also want to talk to our public about other facilities besides paving, bridges, and ferries. We're beginning to involve them in more of the discussions about these minor types of facilities and assets, such as rest areas. We have other categories for unstable slope, for electrical features, and for drainage features, such as culverts and enclosed drainage systems. In this particular case, we're talking about our rest areas. We used to evaluate our rest areas as a whole. Beginning in the late 1990s, we began evaluating them not by the sewer, the water, the building, the site, so that we could have a statewide priority based on what was essential in order to maintain the service to our public. We can also conduct regular annual surveys with our public to find out what they like about our rest areas and are they meeting their needs. Next slide.
Pat, can you speed it up? I think if you could finish in a few minutes, that would be great.
I am pretty close. I just
have
3 more to go through. I just put this slide in here to emphasize the fact that as we sit down to put together our 6 to 10 year plan and how we're going to preserve our assets, that we have our maintenance folks right there with us at the table, along with John and Daniela, so that we can use strategic maintenance to ensure that we can get maximum life out of every dollar we spend. Next slide. So what does the future hold? The future is not terribly rosy. We continue to see a declining revenue from more efficient vehicles and as well as less fuel being consumed. And that then leads us to how do we plan for the future? Next slide. We recently have been developing some new tools within the department so that we can do scenario predictive planning. This is an example of one in which currently our flexible pavement on the left is at about 97% performance to our targets. However, we can predict then, based on the data that we collect and the way our system is performing, where we'll be at different investment levels. In this case, we are looking at $275 million per biennium will increase or decrease our performance from 3% all the way down to the point where every 54% of our pavements poor or very poor condition. But this is one of the scenarios. Again, I'm showing it as a tool that we developed. Next slide. So what does that then lead us to? We see that we have to continue to focus on looking for the most cost-effective solutions. There's going to be, and they are on the right, there are risks associated with this. We are going to communicate those risks to our public and our legislature. And we've established a brand called Moving Washington, where we maintain and keep our roadways safe and look for low-cost, effective measures to reduce congestion and move freight. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Daniela to tie off the last message on how she's going to wrap all this together for the future.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I know we have no time left, so I just want to say a few things that and I'll leave those slides for you to peruse on your own time later. But basically, we have to redouble our efforts to be in the same place everybody else is. We need new funding, new revenue. We have some significant investment needs. Pat just talked about pavement. It's just the tip of the iceberg, but we have many more areas. Our ferries are just about sinking, literally. And we do have huge investment needs in assets. So we have to redouble our efforts to be more accountable, to connect to risk management, with the performance and asset management in an even more enhanced way than we have done to date. We do not subscribe to the notion of silos on the agencies. You know, the fact of us three sitting here making this presentation is very indicative of how we normally work together. And it's a very typical approach for us to figure out how we're going to solve the problems for the future. So with that, I want to close our presentation. Thank you for allowing us to talk to you about what we're doing.
Thank you, Daniela, Pat, and John. So our next speaker is Jennifer Brandenburg. She is the State Asset Manager for North Carolina Department of Transportation. In this position, she's responsible for the administration of all state-wide maintenance programs affecting the 50,000 miles of their state highway network. During her 26-year career with the department, she's held various construction and maintenance positions throughout the agency. Jennifer.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I figured out how to work that phone thing. Well, while asset management is a serious kind of subject, I'm the kind of person that thinks a little humor helps us remember things better. So I thought it would be easier to remember some of North Carolina's key points using movie titles. So get out your Netflix instant queue list and follow along with me as we go back to the future. Next slide, please, Jonas. And I am a classic old movie buff, so the original Ocean's 11 with Danny Ocean and the Rat Pack, they had to have a plan to break into that casino, so we've got a plan of what we're going to cover here today. And it's where we've been, what happened, how we regrouped, and where we're moving forward to now. So, classic movie, The Way We Were. We began this in 1998 with a legislative mandate to present a condition report to the legislature. We had no real performance measures at the time. We had to work on performance measures. We've refined them a couple of different times through the years. In the process, we have implemented 3 different management systems. Our maintenance management system went live first. Our pavement management system, we replaced an existing in-house legacy-based system. And then our bridge management system has just come online in the last 2-3 years, and that was also replacing an old management system. One of the recent things we've done is tie employee performance and our personal performance evaluations to the condition of our system. We've worked hard at all these years at implementing or defining our performance measures and implementing the different pieces of asset management all the way through here. Just in 2010, when we thought we had it all together, it was gone in 60 seconds or gone in more like 18 months. Our director of asset management retired. Great guy. He really drove the program. We reorganized and put all of the groups that were asset management in another part of the operation known as field support. And what it did was really water down the message. It spread it out to where we sort of lost that asset management focus. Each of the central groups, the pavement management group, the bridge management group, they all, because we lost this asset management focus, they really began to set their own priorities and do different things. And we really lost the field emphasis on our asset management program. So Batman is reinvented every few years in a new Batman series, and The Dark Knight Rises seems to fit for us in our recent restructure and rise from this problem. As we reevaluated things in asset management in early 2012, we realized we had lost this focus on asset management, and it became really, really apparent to us when we tried to implement our trade-off analysis tool. Agile Assets is the program that we use for our MMS, PMS, and BMS, and as part of that package, we implemented a trade-off analysis tool, and it really became apparent when we tried to implement that tool, thinking it would be the greatest thing ever and the field people would really like to be able to see where they need to spend their money. Nobody really owned that tool because it worked across all three systems. My group owned the maintenance management system, pavement owned PMS, bridge owned BMS, but nobody really had authority across all of those things to make them all work together and to get this trade-off analysis tool implemented. So we really had a hard time trying to tie performance to funding when we realized what was going on, and our chief engineer then sort of directed a refocus for us, and we reorganized. Most of the original asset management did come back together into one group. Our bridge, in the interim time, our bridge maintenance folks and our structure design people merged, and that new unit called structures management did not come back under the asset management umbrella. But right now, asset management is the central maintenance operations, the equipment and fleet operations, and the pavement operations. Those are now what's asset management. And those are the groups that I now have under my world as state asset manager. Something else that we worked on while we were in there, we were interested in what the public thought of our roadway conditions, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but we had been measuring ourselves all these years, but we were interested in what the public thought. And then this year, just in December, our condition assessment report that we have to put out to the legislature went through a remodeling of its own, and it became new and improved. So we have risen in lots of parts. Yana, if you'll hit the next one. And the roadway reviews that we did with the public, we realized we've been doing our own internal measures, and as engineers are, if I can get a 99, that's not good enough. I want 100. We're aspirational sorts of creatures. So we began to think, maybe we've broken over the efficiency curve in a lot of these measures that we're doing. So to check ourselves, we put the public in bands in October of 2011 and let them do just a windshield survey of our roadway system and ask them some really broad, generic sorts of questions. There was about 300 people in 61 different communities across the state. We had just Joe average citizens as well as some of our MPO and planning organization folks, as well as some elected officials. We put them all in vans and rode them around and showed them our system and asked them what they thought. And then these are some of they're just really high-level findings, but in general, they thought our interstate system was meeting their expectations. And I'll show you what we think we get on that system in just a second, but they thought we were meeting their expectations. Primary system, they thought we were meeting their expectations, but they identified some concerns with the shoulders. And then the secondary system, although we were slightly below their expectations, we were really, really close. And the things that they thought were concerning to them was pavement conditions, smoothness, width of lanes, striping and markers. But even their concerns were really, really close to meeting expectations. So we were fairly pleased with what the public said to us. And this is one of our roll-up scores, is an infrastructure health score. We do track individual things. We track roadside features, bridges, and pavement separately, and get condition measures on each of those things. And what we were finding was our roadside features, our drainage and shoulders and ditches and those things, were really meeting target or exceeding target in a lot of cases. Our bridge conditions were trending up. Our pavement conditions were trending up. But when we rolled it all together into this infrastructure health, where we roll all those pieces in, and it's a percentage split of how much each one of those things makes up, you see the blue interstate line is hovering right around 85, and our target is a 91. Well, if the public said that we were meeting their expectations on the interstate, well, we may be being a little aspirational. Now, also understanding that the public doesn't see ditches and pipes and those sorts of things from 65 miles an hour riding down the road. So we know that. So we were trying to work with some of those issues as well. You see the primary system trending up. Our target is 86. And the secondary system has had a bit of a dip, but it's headed back up, and that target is an 82. So, Yana, hit the next one. When we combine what the public says they think our system is, what our own scores say our system is, and we run our funding needs over a 5-year period, we found out we really weren't far off of how much money we needed. If you look toward the bottom, the estimated funding allocation is what the legislature gives us every year, and you see that this current fiscal year they gave us $1.2 billion. What I calculated I needed out of state funds was $1.25 billion. So I'm really not far off in the amount of money totally that I need. The concern and the issue then is the pot that it's in and the funding, the strings that are attached to those different pots. So just take a second to explain a couple of these things. The maintenance and operations fund that money is divvied out by system. We get so much amount of it on primary and so much amount of it on secondary system, and I cannot move the two. So if I think I need more money on primary and I've got excess money in secondary, I can't move it. I have to use it where it is. Contract resurfacing is a sole purpose fund of money. It is for asphalt overlays. And what we call pavement and bridge preservation, the last couple of years our legislature had said, we don't want you to spend any of that money on pavement. We want you to spend it all on bridges because we think your bridges need more work than your pavement does. So they really put strings around where we could spend our money, which was causing us some problems. So those are some of the things we've got to work on. And Yana, if you'll hit the next one. So as we speed ahead into 2013, it's a year for us of new beginnings. As we compare our original progress from 98 to 2010, with Speed 1, where he jumps the bus, we have jumped forward into the world of asset management. In 2013, I sort of put our progress in there with Sandra Bullock and the cruise ship. This is a year where we're going to be using trade-off analysis to estimate our funding splits. It's a year where we're going to work with our legislature to remove some of those funding restrictions. They put them in there through the years because they thought they could make better decisions than we could. If we take them the data that shows them this is where we need to spend it, maybe they will reduce some of those funding strings and let us spend our money in what we say is a higher need. We will also be pushing asset management concepts into ports and ferries. In our department, we have had ferries for years, but we have just added our ports to the Department of Transportation in the last few years. So we're going to be working with them and pushing asset management concepts a little deeper and a little broader in the organization. And then we want to institutionalize asset management principles. We're also going to be watching MAP 21 just to kind of see what it is. We think we've got the basic pieces, but we want to make sure that we fit everything we have into MAP 21 smoothly. And if you remember that movie, she had to avoid the tankers, and we hope not to run aground, as the cruise ship did toward the end of the movie. So, but we'll be full speed ahead with asset management. And Yana, I have one more slide. So, are we there yet? No, we're not. Some key points that we have learned as we've gone through this journey in movie titles that I'll share with you is the performance measures are a critical piece to everything. Reevaluating and then benchmarking your performance measures are critical. Making sure you're not breaking over that curve and spending more money than you really have to spend. There again, the engineering can be aspirational, but it can cost you a lot of money down the road. Leveraging your management systems, the 3 systems we have, leveraging those systems to provide good data to help you drive your decision-making process. And you have to institutionalize the concept. We were fortunate to have several good leaders in place when we had some key retirements, but at the same time, we sort of dipped in our focus in asset management. So as personnel changes, you need to be sure that your progress doesn't stall, that you can keep moving forward. And hopefully our road trip from here on will not be as stressful as Ice Cube's road trip was with that menagerie that he was hauling along with him. And, Yana, that is all I have.
Thank you, Jennifer. And for just another reminder, if you have a question, if you could type it into the Q&A section on the menu bar on the top of your screen. All right, our next presentation is from the Michigan Department of Transportation. And we have Ron Zibber, who is the manager in the asset management section of Michigan DOT, and he oversees the department-wide activities for data collection, physical inventory, civil reporting, road ownership, and several management systems. And we also have Craig Newell, and he is the manager of the statewide system management section within the Bureau of Transportation Planning, and he's been involved in asset management within the division for many years. And he's a member of the Call for Projects Committee, which coordinates and reviews the annual highway call for projects, as well as NCDOT ITS Steering Committee. Ron and Craig.
Okay, thank you, Yana. This is Ron. I'm going to talk for a very few minutes here because the meat of much of this is going to be handled by Craig. My section does handle a lot of the data collection and data management for much of the many of the assets in the department. But our objectives and basically the outline of what we want to talk about today is basically an overview of how we look at asset management at Michigan DOT and the various components of that. We're going to chat a little bit about the tools, and I'm emphasizing a little bit about the tools because the meat is getting into how we use the performance measures that come out of our processes to assemble programs, transportation programs in order to satisfy goals. And that part is where Craig is going to be stepping in. Hannah, would you, let's go to the next slide, please. Asset management overall is really the primary role and function of DOTs, starting initially with the planning, designing, building, and managing the roadway systems. And then over time, it's grown into multimodal and intermodal type concerns, which has led us down all kinds of interesting paths, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. So what I'm going to be speaking on primarily is the next slide. This one here describes, you see an overall asset management process. Given the comments of the previous slide, you could change that overall MDOT operations. Looking at a very, very high level, we run our organization, and I think most of us do it from policy goals and objectives, planning and programming processes, various program delivery processes, and then systems monitoring and performance results. We keep presenting this slide, first of all, because it's been presented nationally by many people over time, and it helps us
see how we're doing in these various areas in the asset management process. Our policy goals and objectives are usually very high-level desired states of the transportation system. Most of the time that's outside of administrative control. We may report against that, and we do report against that. But that would be the sorts of things where we would say we want 90% of our road system in good or fair condition, or crash rates below a certain number, or congestion as a system kind of statistic meeting some goal and objective. But it's basically the barometer that we, as a department, use to say, are we being successful or not? It's also what we would use to say we can or cannot make the goals and objectives given maybe the funding or the conditions that we have and the way things are deteriorating. But these are very policy level, they're not administrative, and they're not internal performance measures at all. The next box is our planning and programming. This is where, they kept that slide in there. We have strategies to achieve goals, preservation strategies, safety, where we have programs that consist of projects. We set the criteria for what's going to be in the program and feeds into program delivery. Program delivery is actually turning the identified activities into actual assets. And this would include our development processes, construction, and actually maintenance projects as well. And lastly, systems monitoring and performance. This is really where all of our assets live almost all the time. We monitor performance or assets on the ground, either from a construction standpoint or physical condition standpoint, or from operational like congestion or safety. This is where the measures that come out of this either identify the maintenance projects that need to be done for program delivery, where we are able to say or not say that we're going to achieve our goals and objectives up through the top, or basically how we are going to use our performance statistics to identify the projects that are going to be included in the programs. So very, very quick because we're running out of time. And now Craig is going to discuss how these measures and forecasts that we develop get into the ultimate planning process.
Thanks, Ron. So now let's take a closer look at how asset management and performance measurement help guide program development processes for us here at Michigan DOT. Our first step, of course, is to estimate federal and state revenues. Then the next is a call for projects process, and that includes numerous highway program categories. We initiate that call. The call helps us identify, select, and approve highway projects that align with the department's goals, policies, and the strategic plan. The programs included in the call for projects must be coordinated to achieve an integrated or corridor approach to preserving the state highway system. The process includes strategy development, project selection, scoping and estimating of candidate projects, and ultimately project and program approval. This program of projects is then published annually in our 5-year transportation program. And of course, with any good asset management process, we monitor progress towards the goal, obtain feedback, and make adjustments along the way. And I'll touch on some examples of that here shortly. So let's take a little bit closer look at the call for projects process itself. Annually, available revenue is allocated to program categories in our highway program investment strategy. And this strategy contains more than 30 template categories. Each are allocated a template target. A template is a category of funding for a specific program, such as road preservation, bridge preservation, or safety. And it represents the amount of funding available to make progress towards achieving a particular program goal and keeps the program constrained within our available revenues. Payment funding is then allocated by formula to the regions based on condition, usage, cost, and eligible lane miles. The next step is that the call letter itself is developed and distributed to our 7 MDOT regions and every statewide program manager. The letter includes 9 different highway programs, anything from pavement preservation to freeway lighting program. And for each of these programs, the letter includes a program description, goals and strategic direction, funding target, as well as the key dates for submittal and approval of that particular program. Fixed strategies are developed for each program as well. This provides us the ability to forecast future condition. These strategies must be constrained within the program's funding target, and they are approved and reviewed annually to ensure that they're being implemented. And again, this is key. Implementation, of course, is key. Why else would we develop a strategy if we're not going to guide project selection using that strategy? And then also, if we don't implement that strategy, it would lead to incorrect condition forecasting as well. Now let's take a little bit closer look at the NCDOT Pavement Preservation Program and how asset management and performance measurement have guided our investments of our funds. Back in 1997, it had actually been 13 years since we had our last transportation revenue increase in the state. There was a federal aid match shortfall in state revenue similar to what we and probably many of you are experiencing today. There were cries for more accountability and transparency in public stewards. So a vision was established by our State Transportation Commission, and they established a goal to get to 95% of our freeways in good condition by 2007 and 85% of our non-freeways. And we selected remaining service life, we call it RSL, as the pavement performance measure. The tool used back in 1997, as well as it is today, is called the Road Quality Forecasting System, or RQFS. And this is a program-level model that we developed in-house, and it's used to forecast future pavement condition. It can also determine funding need based on achieving a desired future condition. So if we say we want to reach a certain percent good or fair, the model can tell us how much funding we need annually to achieve that condition. Each of our MDOT 7 regions develops fixed strategies. These strategies identify specified percentages of the pavement network to move from one RSL category to another. And over the years, we have learned that an asset management approach that includes a mix of fixes, meaning doing the right fix at the right time, is the most effective strategy. And in fact, we have increased our CPM, or capital preventive maintenance budget, from just $30 million back in 1997 to over $90 million today. Back when we developed the goal, we determined that we could reach the goal with an additional $200 million per year, and that was a 4-cent revenue increase. As a result of the analysis we were doing, we were able to secure that 4-cent revenue increase, 4-cent gas revenue increase from the legislature. However, we soon found out that that projection was optimistic, and you can see that here on this slide. In 2002, just 5 years into our 10-year goal, our QFS forecasts were showing that we were not going to achieve the condition state promised by 2007, and that we were going to come up about 6% short at 84% or thereabout. There are numerous reasons for this, some of which include the way that we were accounting and the model was accounting for inflation, the way that we were doing project fixed life assumptions, as well as some project cost estimations. So in tweaking some of those, we were able to rerun the model and come up with some new forecasts and convince decision makers that we needed approximately an additional $500 million investment, and we would be able to meet the goal. So in 2003, we announced, along with the governor, the Preserve, what we called Preserve First bonding initiative, road and bridge program, preservation program for $500 million that focused on roads and bridges, and then we were back on track after those adjustments and our forecasting, within our forecasting and investment strategy, and we were assuming we would be able to achieve the goal. And then as you can see here, the 2007 goal was achieved thanks to those adjustments that we were able to make along the way. However, at this point in time, the future doesn't look so bright. Today's forecasts project that we'll lose all of the progress that we had made since '97. But I should mention, however, that last year we began working with the legislature and a work group that was appointed to identify how much additional funding the state needs in order to achieve good pavements. And we've also partnered with local road representatives in order to identify the total statewide need, and are currently working with the governor's office to help draft a new revenue proposal. And for a number of years now, there's been discussion about increasing revenues in the state. It hasn't come to light yet, but we're still hopeful that in working with the governor's office and the legislature as we are, something hopefully will be done here soon. So quickly, a couple of our other programs in the department, we forecast bridge condition in a similar manner that I've just discussed with the pavement program, using the bridge condition forecasting system, and BCFS uses MBI ratings to measure bridge network condition. And you can see on this graph here that approximately another $60 million per year is needed to achieve our bridge goal, which is just under 95% good and fair. Here's another quick example on this slide on safety of how asset management and performance monitoring has led us to tweak our investment strategy to achieve the goal. In 2008, the NCDOT safety program was increased by approximately $75 million over the 3-year time frame, 2008 through 2010. And this increase was to fund a cable barrier program and a rumble strip program, along with existing safety program investments. And on the next slide, you can see as a result, serious injuries on our network declined by 23% as a result of that additional investment. And we also achieved a 16% decrease in fatalities. Okay, so in conclusion then, NCDOT depends on its asset management approach for highway program development and performance monitoring to make the investment and strategy adjustments necessary to continue progress toward our program goals. Our call for projects process and our forecasting tools, such as RQFS and BCFS, allow for proactive program adjustments along the way. I gave a couple examples of how we were able to make those adjustments and achieve the goals. And then, of course, along with everyone else, we look forward to hearing more on FHWA on MAP 21 performance measurement and the upcoming notice of proposed rulemaking. So thank you.
Thank you, Ron and Craig. And so that concludes the presentations part of this webinar. And Matt, we will turn it over to you for the Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Yana. So if you have a question, if you can type it into the Q&A at the top of your bar, there says Q&A. Just type it in there. We have a couple so far, and I will just sort of take them in order as you type them. So the first one comes from Katie Zimmerman, who asks, MAP 21 includes national goal areas that have not been talked about by the speaker, such as environmental sustainability. What kind of an impact has MAP 21 had on the performance measures that states are using, and how are they responding to differences between state performance measures and national goal areas? Let me do one. I think I can sort of answer that in part. I know that under the joint planning rule, which is done between FTA and FHWA, that updated rule will come through an NPRM at the same time as the performance measure and the asset management ones. FHWA will identify how states could address the national goal areas within their overall planning processes. Right now, that's sort of an unknown, and hopefully within that rule, that rule-making bill, it'll be more clearly defined, because right now there is not a direct linkage between the national goal areas that are identified in MAP 21 and the actual performance measurements or performance management areas that are also identified. I want to put, I guess, Daniela Bremer on the spot to see if she wanted to respond, just because of her involvement with the SCOPM task force, to see if she has any other thoughts on that.
Hi. So Katie's question was, how are we going to address the goal areas that are not in the provisions of the measurements that we're discussing right now? Is that a question?
Yeah, they're actual national level. They're national goal areas in MAP 21, but then the performance measures are not directly tied to the national goal areas. And how might states address that?
Kind of addressed that a little bit already. So basically, there's no one-on-one correlation between the goal areas and performance measures. They're sort of implied in some ways. The goal areas that are being defined, I think at this point we're focusing on performance measurement requirements that are stipulated in MAP 21. Now, the national goal areas are something that I think states do consider, and they are not, for us, for example, Washington State, they're pretty much, I think, I would say in alignment with our state goal area. So, that we are pursuing in our strategic plan, our overarching strategic endeavors and initiatives. So I don't see a specific activity right now to develop performance measures for these national goal areas are not in the performance measure part of MAP 21, at least not on our side. And as far as the task force is concerned, I think Matthew talked about that already. We're focusing on those areas that have the immediate implementation needs and requirements.
Thanks, Daniela. I'm going to keep on going here because we have a bunch more questions and not a lot of time. Steve asked a question for Michigan regarding the Michigan presentation. When you say that maintenance projects are included in the program delivery piece, does that include routine maintenance efforts?
Yes. Basically, there's an awful lot of activities that happen to assets on a day-to-day basis, and folks are driving the road every day, and it's part of building that database that allows you to keep your data current. So you have performance measures and activities that are handle both routine and emergency reactive type maintenance. That's part of monitoring, and I guess that's part of the systems monitoring is not only just an annual process, but what happens on a day-to-day basis, and that allows you to keep your data updated.
Great, thanks. Next one comes from Bill Scheibel. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, but he asked, how does Washington State DOT and North Carolina DOT select the projects to be built annually with pavement preservation funds? So, Jennifer, do you want to try to answer that one first?
We use the pavement management system and our pavement condition ratings. Our local field people, the pavement preservation money is something that the local divisions can direct and use where they see fit. We don't direct that from central office. They use their pavement condition ratings and their pavement management system to select those projects. We have a pretty robust chip seal program as well as that contract resurfacing dedicated funding.
Great, thanks. Washington State?
Yeah, this is Pat. So we have 4 performance criteria. We have red depth, a pavement structural condition score on the amount of cracking. We also have ride and then skid resistance. Probably 60% is based on cracking, and about 35% on rutting, and just a very small percentage on skid and ride. We have analysis units. They're looked at every year. If you fall below a score of 45, then you're due for paving in that year. It's predictive in nature. Also, bear with me a second. So what we're looking at is that if we have 5 or 6 pavement analysis units together and they're not all due in, let's say, 3 years, we go in with our maintenance folks, and they do selective crack sealing, and so that all pavement analysis sections are due in the same year. We have been averaging about an additional 3 years of pavement life on our asphalt, taking it from 15 years up to 18. We're trying to get to 19 years through this use of selective pavement crack sealing.
Great. Just so everybody knows, I'm going to plan on going over by about 5 minutes because there are a lot of great questions coming on here. So just so for Yana, just so you know, I'm going to plan on going over by about 5 minutes here. The next one is directed toward the Michigan DOT. What data are you using to create your forecast in RQFS, and are any non-MDOT agencies using the tool to create forecasts?
Our forecasting with the RQFS tool uses remaining service life. To develop the remaining service life data, we do pavement surveys with a collection van that collects distress data as well as much other data. And then we in-house have set up how to review and score that pavement data and then translate that through numerous deterioration curves into our remaining service life data. And I think it takes 3 points three historical points of data to determine the curve and then determine the remaining service life. So using that remaining service life for our entire network feeds the RQFS model, and then based on deterioration rates and fixed life values that are assigned to each individual project, and looking at those historically as well, we're able to determine how quickly the pavement's going to deteriorate and then forecast future conditions.
Great. Thanks. The next one goes back to Jennifer at North Carolina DOT, and it comes from two people, Shante Hastings and Pete Stefanos. And the question is centered around targets. And were targets adjusted for your measures based on the roadway reviews that were done? And then Pete asked, are you planning to adjust your targets based on the feedback you received from the public?
To answer the first question, no, we did not adjust any of our targets as of yet based on these roadway reviews, because we really just got the report finished up in the spring of the year. The verdict is still out as to whether we are going to change much in our targets, again, because they're looking at the things from the top of the road rather than looking at some of the safety issues and the structural things underneath. Things that we are using that data for is on our pre-construction side as we plan projects. One of the things I did mention was lighting. For instance, in more rural areas, the public, when they did their nighttime ride, wanted to see more roadway lighting. Risk management sort of approach to that. Is it something that we want to include or not? They wanted wider shoulders on some of our primary routes. In some areas of the state, wider shoulders just really physically aren't possible. So we need to make some trade-off decisions on some of those things. That's really a lot of where we're going to use that data.
Great. So I'm going to ask one more question. There are a bunch more here we just don't have time to get to. Last one comes from Ahmad in Mississippi, and his question sort of deals with any tools or techniques to obtain general or specific estimates of data collection costs and cost savings from the implementation of transportation asset management. So I'll open it up to all three presenters. If you have any information or data on the cost savings or the cost to collect the data or cost savings because of an asset management program that was implemented.
Well, this is Jennifer in North Carolina. We actually had that conversation this year for the first time. My data collection process is extremely expensive. Well, most states would think it's expensive, but when you look at a $1.2 billion maintenance and operations budget, our cost to collect that, to do that data collection data, is about $2 million, which some people think is extremely expensive. But what we started, the conversation we had this year as we were putting that legislative report together, was now that we have better and better data on condition, and we're starting to see these indicators change from failing to passing or to exceeding, we've gotten enough of a return on investment that now we can see that we need to start moving money to other places. So I think it's worth it. We do 23,000 samples in a year, but I have an 80,000-mile system, so my data collection effort is pretty huge.
Michigan or Washington State, you want to add to that?
Well, this is Pat in Washington. I'd like to answer it just a little different. So with regard to our flexible pavements, our asphalts, our chip seals, asset management has helped us save a lot of money. We've been in pursuit of a lowest life cycle cost, and over the last 5 years, we've converted all of our asphalt roadways that have traffic volumes between 2 and 10,000 ADT from ACP to chip seal. On an annualized basis, we saved 50% of the cost of an asphalt overlay and have gotten the same performance criteria in terms of rutting and cracking. We believe that that's saving us somewhere between $60 and $65 million a biennium. That we weren't getting that kind of revenue because we were already transferring it to the big capital projects that had been passed by the legislature. So by using asset management, it kept our payment performance up and allowed us at the same time to deliver those major projects. I think we're also looking at how much data does it take to be able to know where you are and predict the future. And one of the things that we're looking at is if we can begin developing more predictive models that are less data intensive, but lots of discussion going on within the DOT here as to how to do that.
Thanks, Pat. And then finally, Michigan, did you want to add anything?
Oh, we've had a study here over the last year and a half, or an activity about looking at various ways that we collect data. What data do we need to answer various questions? We haven't done the kind of work, I think, that would be necessary to say we should be converting from asphalt to chip seal. But we've been looking at just, are there redundancies that we should get rid of? Are there efficiencies that we should be looking at? And the previous question about maintenance projects was the model that we're looking at is a model. What I think our trick is going to be is to see how much data collection we can build into existing operations so that data collection isn't a separate activity, but it's part of our business process. Our business processes so that we don't have to have special data collection activities unless it's for maybe system condition monitoring or inspections. But I don't think we've experienced lower costs yet, but I think we will experience those lower costs.
Thank you. So that ends it for the Q&A. We have some other ones which we are documenting, and we will answer those and sort of put some questions, some answers to those up on the TAM website, along with the video and the slide deck for this webinar. So Jana, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And just a reminder that we have 2 more webinars already scheduled. The next one will be on March 13th at the same time on asset management business models and barriers to implementation. And we have the next one 2 months later on May 8th on asset management and risk management. So I hope you'll be able to join us for those. And then we will continue the next set. So over the coming quarter, we'll be determining the next set of 4 in this webinar series. So again, based on what Steve stated at the beginning of the presentation of the webinar, please send ideas of webinars you'd like to see. Thank you, everyone.